First of all, let me manage your expectations here a bit. I'm really not that good a speaker. One of the most challenging things I find in terms of speaking is high school graduations. I've sworn off them, but I've done a number of them. And a number of years ago, but I got to tell you, so one of my friends tells me that when I do speak, sometimes I have a habit, a bad habit, particularly if I don't know the room. If I just kind of walk in, the room is there. I have this bad habit, is that before I kind of get into the speech, I'll kind of like wander a bit in terms of, but I'm trying to get a feel for the room. But he told me that really unsettles people, because they think I don't know, that I'm lost or I'm drinking or something. But I have that habit. So we do this high school speech at a high school graduation in a place called Bedeck, which is about an hour or so from Sydney. And I thought it went pretty good. Ray was with me, and then we start the drive home. And the tough thing about these graduations is that kind of I think in the mind of the students, I mean, you're the obstacle to the party. Like there's a party coming, and you're the one that's the obstacle. But anyway, that aside, I thought it went pretty well, so we're heading out. We get on the highway, and there's a Tim Hortons. So it's been a long day. So we stop so I can get a cup of coffee so I can drive home, stay awake. And I go in, and my God, in Tim Hortons, there's one of the graduates and her parents, and it looks like a grandmother. So I go up to them and I congratulate the graduate and shake hands with the mother and the dad and the grandmother. And so when I get to the grandmother, she says to me, "Well, to be honest with you, as soon as you started, I knew you weren't much of a speaker." So then what do you do with that, Okay. But then she says, but I got to say, once you got going, I forgot how bad you really were. So that's my prayer for tonight, that once I get going, maybe you'll forget how bad I really am. There was in terms of sometimes a small crowd, 100 years ago, I was part of a group home, and this was in kind of when, the Russians and the Americans, it was pretty tense. So I became part of this group home, a nuclear disarmament society. And there was this older gentleman, George McCackern. He was like 90 at the time, and he was part of the group. He was the vice chair. And George had great stories. So part of George's claim to fame, he had been a communist at some point in his life. And anyway, we had this kind of conference workshop thing on a Saturday, and we had very few people, and I felt very badly about it, that I had failed in some way to get them out, and George picked up on my disappointment and told me, no, don't worry about it. So he proceeded to tell me this story that at some point in the midst of the Depression, they made arrangements for the head of the Communist Party of Canada to come to Cape Breton to speak. This would be kind of, things were rocking at the time, big labor union movement and all that. So this was in the winter, and the day he was coming, there was this huge blizzard. And nonetheless, the train got through, and George met this chap at the train station, and the snow is, and the wind is blowing, and George takes him, and they walk up to the Vogue Theatre, which is on Charlotte Street in Sydney. And they walk in, and there is one fellow in the theater. And the president of the Communist Party says to George, what do you think I should do? And before George is able to say anything, he says, I think I better say a few words. I'll go up on the stage. So George said he went up on the stage, and he started speaking. And 4 hours later, he stopped. And George says, you know, it's the best speech I ever heard in my life, eh? So I'm not going to speak for 4 hours. I want you to know that. So look, first of all, look, I really want to thank Gord and this organization for your hospitality. It's just, you're quite grand, and you treat us with such elegance. So thank you for that. I really, I was here for a lot of the day, and must say, I was really impressed. It was a grand series of presentations, and I felt at home. And I just thought the whole day was just filled with significance. So it's a wonderful thing to be witness to this. I'm really taken, I mean, there is this thing that kind of in the air, you know, that rural is sort of in decline. You know, everybody just accepts that urban is growing and rural is in decline. It's kind of like that's kind of become what much of the world believes. And you got to be careful about that stuff. There's a story in terms of assumptions, and it goes something like this. There was a father and a son, and they lived together. The father was retired, so every morning he'd get up and he'd make the breakfast, and then he would start to work at getting his son up for school. And it was always a big job because the son was really reluctant to get out of bed. So he'd get the breakfast going, and then he would start a call upstairs to the son to come, to get up, but he wouldn't come. So this particular morning, he's calling him breakfast already. He won't come, he won't come. So the father goes upstairs, knocks on the door, and he says, son, you have to get up. It's time to get up. And the son says, finally, no, Dad, I don't want to. I don't want to go to school. The father says, son, you got to go to school. He says, Dad, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school for 3 reasons. Number 1, I find it hard. Number 2, the teachers don't like me. And number 3, the students are always making fun of me. The father says, son, I'm sorry, but you have to go to school. You have to go to school for 3 reasons. Number 1, it's your responsibility. Number 2, you're 45 years old. And number 3, you are the principal. So Breton is this lovely island. It's connected to mainland, so it's on the very east coast. There's one more Canadian province beyond that for those of you from the States, Newfoundland. But Cape Breton is on the easternmost part of Nova Scotia. It's connected to the rest of the province by a causeway. It's very beautiful, and it's had this incredibly challenging time for the last century. It was industrial, rich deposits of coal, and the steel plant on the east part of the island. And the private sector, who ran the coal fields and the steel plant, they left in the mid-60s, and the government of Canada took over the coal fields, and the province of Nova Scotia took over the steel plant. And in many ways, that didn't go well. And there was a real price that was paid for that arrangement, which I'll talk about in a little while. And then New Dawn started in 1976 in the midst of this kind of like decline that had started. And I could talk forever about New Dawn. But look, as a way of kind of giving you a glimpse of it, without talking and talking, let me just share a couple of videos. And New Dawn has always been there's always been two parts to it. One is really, I think, trying to provide service to people. And secondly, trying to kind of find a way of helping the community discover what its gift to the world should be in the 21st century. And that is not an easy thing to discover. So let me share one. So the first video is it's very brief. It's about a Meals on Wheels program that we've been doing for some time. And the second video is about an arts and cultural center. We're in the process of getting ready to launch. So please.
I started out in this business going to deliver 200 meals, but we reached a milestone last week. We delivered our 7,000 meals since we started.
I couldn't believe it. 7,000 meals Donnie McRae has delivered.
Morning, Bill.
Hi, Donnie. How you doing? They weren't all for me. That's a lot of volunteering.
Volunteering for Meals on Wheels is pleasurable, it's easy. I do it in an hour, maybe an hour and a half, once a week. And I'm meeting a real need, I think, yeah. You know, there are days that I know that I'm the only person they've seen that day. And even if you can only have a few minutes, social interaction, it's important to them. And so I think Meals on Wheels is definitely needed and is filling a real gap in the community.
Have your meal, Ruby. I think once you try it, you won't stop doing it because it is heartwarming and a really rewarding experience.
In 2013, New Dawn acquired an iconic property in the historic north end of Sydney, Cape Breton. The former Holy Angels Convent and adjacent high school was purchased from the Sisters of Notre Dame. Through many months of consultation and engagement with the Cape Breton community, New Dawn determined that affordable spaces for artists were a key piece of missing community infrastructure. New Dawn thus began to formalize its vision for a space in which artists can create, learn, collaborate, and present their work, and then market it to local, national, and global audiences. The Holy Angels Convent was founded in 1885 to provide education to young women in Cape Breton. The school was well known for its instruction in music, drawing, painting, speech, and drama, thus making it the perfect setting for a 21st century arts center. The convent will become a vibrant new home to musicians, composers, and performers, illustrators, painters, photographers, designers, and writers. It will give the island's creative economy a solid foundation and will ensure that the cultural sector leads to economic transformation in Cape Breton. The main entrance to the Arts Centre is the George Street Common. There's a dining terrace that connects the indoor and outdoor spaces and restores the balcony as an important historic feature. The structure is divided into 4 levels. Level 1 is accessed from the George Street Common or from the Nepean Street entry court. This level provides custom-designed spaces for 2 of the convent's anchor arts tenants. Level 2 offers 3 multi-purpose spaces in the north wing. One can be used for groups of up to 15 people, a second will accommodate up to 40, and a third for gatherings of up to 100. The second floor south wing features a cafe and lounge, opening onto the new exterior terrace. The north wing of Level 3 is home to 2 more anchor tenants. The south wing features private studios ranging in size from 100 to 300 square feet. They've been designed for visual artists and feature wash-up stations in each studio. The south wing of Level 4 offers private studios with additional acoustic treatment to accommodate musicians and music instruction. The north wing is a large, open creative space with 20 workspaces in a brightly lit shared studio, providing artists with affordable space to develop and refine their work alongside their creative peers and the growing creative community. All around the world, support for the arts and its further development has consistently led to economic growth and community revitalization. In the convent, Cape Breton will at last have a vibrant, affordable, modern place for those driven to create, collaborate, and transform the island through artistic expression. For more information, please visit theconvent.ca.
I was just speaking with an artist the other day, and she said that for the first time in her life as an artist and as a Cape Bretoner, she feels good about being an artist here. People spent years developing a concept so that artists can have a nice space to work from. It makes me feel like what I do is important.
There are the bricks and mortar idea that you just have a space that is reliable and safe and conducive to creative work. But I think far more than that is the idea that it also validates who you are and your work.
To have a space that is going to be brand new and a quality space and filled with other creative people and affordable, that's pretty special.
Frankly, for me, it's given me the idea that I want to revive my business again, so it's a new start.
I think that New Dawn is, as an economic development organization, is getting into the arts and culture sector because they've done their research and they really understand that when you make direct investment into arts and culture, economic development is very close to follow.
Our children, our children's children, will see the full realization of this in terms of a real transformation of a culture and an economy. If we have a vibrant arts and culture community, there's far more likelihood that people will be attracted to come to Cape Breton and be more likely to stay.
The value to the community of growing the creative economy is that it brings people home, it allows people to stay here, it develops population growth. There's so many of our own people who've had to leave because they didn't find the resources here that they needed.
I think it's just a starting point, I think, for bigger things. I don't know that we're even able to predict what's going to happen in that building. Like, we can all sit here and talk about, oh, you know, we're going to see other artists or connect with other artists, but those connections we can't predict are what makes this so exciting.
I think that this place that we're in, we're reimagining and we're building new and we're building up and we're dreaming of what things can be. If I can fully embrace it, I feel that other folks can too.
I think it's going to really change the nature of how we look at our downtown, how we look at our community, how we look at what our identity is. Our identity as a steel and coal place has got to be put aside and a new identity adopted, a new identity embraced. We haven't embraced it yet. Hopefully this will help us embrace it.
Thank you, Jonathan. There was, I came across, there was a book that many of you would know by a guy by the name of Jim Collins, who wrote a book called Good to Great, How Good Businesses Become Great Businesses. And in that book, he talks about a fellow by the name of Admiral Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. And he was a running mate for Ross Perot in the American presidential election. So one of the fascinating things about Admiral Stockdale was that he had survived 7 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And that was rather remarkable. Not many had done that. So Collins was interviewing him about that experience. Stockdale said a number of things, and one of the things he said was that it's really important when you're in a tough situation to face up to the circumstances you're in, no matter how brutal they may be. So let me just share with you some of the circumstances that Cape Breton is in, though they be brutal. In the last 25 years, we've lost 30,000 people. The biggest community on Cape Breton Island is the city of Sydney. The population of Sydney is 30,000 people. We've essentially lost the equivalent of the city of Sydney in 25 years. This is in a population, total population, that back 25 years ago was about 150,000. In the last decade, we've lost 4,000 of our youth being under 15 years of age. We have this constant story of school closures in that community. One of the, there's 2 federal ridings in Cape Breton. In one of them, the riding we live in, the rate of child poverty is 3 times the national average. In the second riding, it's not far behind that. In Atlantic, the government of Canada has divided Atlantic Canada into 15 economic regions. There are 7 of those regions in the last decade. 7 of those regions have grown, and 8 of those regions have been in decline. 4 of the regions that have grown are capital regions. They're where the capital is in the province. What that all means is that if you live in a capital region, you've got 100% chance that it's growing. You just can't miss. You don't need a plan, you don't need nothing. It's just going to grow. If, on the other hand, you live in a place outside the capital region, you've got a 75% chance you're going to be in decline. And of all those 15 regions, it's Cape Breton that is declining the fastest. One of the other things that Admiral Stockdale suggested was that if you're going to survive difficult circumstances, and he was in this cage, this bamboo cage where you couldn't stand up and you really couldn't sit down for a lot of the time. He was permanently physically impaired after that experience. But Admiral Stockdale said, when Collins was interviewing him about who survived and who didn't, that experience, he said, well, the first people that didn't survive were the pessimists. they died first. That's surprising. But then he said the second people who died were the optimists. They died second. So what he meant by that was a lot of the fellows who were imprisoned at that time, they would say they'd be captured in the summer, and they'd say, well, we'll be out by Thanksgiving. And then Thanksgiving would come and go. And then they'd say, well, I bet we'll be out of here by Christmas. And Christmas would come and go. And then they'd say, I bet we're going to be out of here by Easter. But Easter would come and go. And then they'd say, surely we'll be out of here by July the 4th, Independence Day, but that would come and go. So eventually, they would just die of a broken heart from disappointment. Part of what happened in Cape Breton is once the government took over, the government is clearly interested in needing to believe that good news, good things are imminent, good things are going to happen. So with every announcement, the rhetoric would be that we've turned the corner, that we're on our way to the promised land. Clearly that was never true. But when you're a desperate people, you desperately want to believe that rhetoric. And over time, they did a lot of damage because the community's heart was broken. Now, despite all that, there's some of us in Cape Breton and all of us at New Dawn who really believe a different way is possible, that we can turn the corner. Admiral Stockdale said that to survive that imprisonment, you had to kind of live inside a paradox. And that paradox was, on the one hand, you had to face up to what you're up against. But then at the same time, you had to believe to the point of knowing that you could prevail. So, kind of the rhetoric in home about Cape Breton, in Nova Scotia about Cape Breton, would be Cape Breton is in decline because it's rural. Halifax, on the other hand, is growing, the capital. It's growing because it's urban. It's a metropolitan area. Now, quite frankly, a lot of us just don't buy that. It's not that simple. What we believe to the point of knowing is that really there are three elements here that are critical to the redevelopment of the island. One is, and I talked about this when I was here before, in 2015, one is the whole business of raising and investing community capital. And the second issue is the issue of governance, in terms of Cape Breton acquiring more say, more autonomy about how to direct itself. And we're blessed that is been given voice in the last couple of years by a man by the name of Dan Christmas. Dan is the first Mi'kmaq senator, first Mi'kmaq person appointed to the Senate of Canada. And he was appointed as an independent senator. So Dan has really taken this on. What New Dawn is proud of is that we, New Dawn, together with the 5 chiefs, band chiefs in Cape Breton, are standing in Dan's wake as he gives voice to this possibility, this need for a conversation about a new governance structure for the island. So let me talk to you about, but I want to talk to you tonight about the third element that we believe is critical. And to point to that third element, I want to kind of just take you across the water a bit. Close to Cape Breton, there is another island, and that is the province of PEI, the province of Prince Edward Island. So Prince Edward Island, in terms of its geography, it's smaller than Cape Breton. And 20 years ago, it had fewer people than Cape Breton. But however, as Cape Breton has declined, PEI has grown. The other interesting thing about PEI, in 2018, this small province has been the fastest growing province in Canada. BC is second. PEI was first last year. Nova Scotia was last, which means Cape Breton was the last of the last. Now, the distinguishing feature about PEI is they've had this, in 1999, the federal government put in place a provincial immigration nomination program. In the last decade, the province of PEI has employed that program really aggressively. They have really recruited and nurtured the possibility of immigration, and immigrants have responded to that. Now, what's interesting about that, PEI hasn't had this kind of flood of jobs it's trying to fill. Instead, the people that have come, the immigrants who have moved to the island, they make it happen. So as Cape Breton has declined, so too has its employment, the number of people participating in the labor force. As PEI has grown, so too has its level of employment, the number of people participating in the labor force. What's happening in terms of immigration is, in the 20th century, immigration was this thing you did. You brought people in to fill jobs. In the 21st century, you bring immigrants in to drive the economy. And PEI figured that out. Now, interestingly, there are like our cousin across the water. You can see PEI from parts of Cape Breton. It's that close. So they're going up, we're going down. So what are they doing? And we want to do some of that. But the problem is they're a province. We're not. So what we decided to do was to go to the Government of Canada and ask the Government of Canada to do a pilot wherein Cape Breton could function as an area that has a regional nomination program. And we then would have the power and the authority to go and recruit immigrants to our island. We thought there were two things we needed to do to kind of set the table for that conversation. The first thing we needed to do was we needed to understand what the attitude of the community would be to immigrants coming. And we figured that people wouldn't understand, it'd be a bit frightening, and we'd have a campaign we'd have to mount to do that. So we do a survey, we do a poll, we brought in a reputable firm, Abacus Data from Ottawa, and they surveyed the whole island. And what was fascinating for us and for them was that 65% of the population indicated, bring them on. 25% bring them on with conditions. The one condition was typically that, are we okay job-wise, Is that going to work out job-wise? So we're well over 80% in terms of people saying yes. Abacus Data told us that was probably one of the best sets of numbers in the country in terms of the openness to immigration. The second issue that was really important here was getting the province on side, because we imagined that once we got in front of the government of Canada, one of the questions they would ask is, well, where's the province on this? So we began to talk to the province, and that didn't go as well as the survey. After a whole series of meetings, essentially their position was, and what we were asking them to do was, number one, to come to Ottawa with us, number two, to give voice to this idea we had and to support it, and to work with us so that help implement it. And they said no, no, and no. And essentially the reason seemed to be that they felt nobody would want to come to Cape Breton. No immigrants would want to come. So we responded, well, nobody wanted to come to Halifax until they instituted the provincial nomination program in 1999. There was nobody coming. But that gave you an advantage. That gave you an incentive. So what we're looking for is that same incentive, because all of the immigrants you're attracting, you're placing them in Halifax. So that's not working for us. We need our own. And I remember this fascinating moment with the deputy minister, and she said to me, so Rankin, what you're really asking for is you want the province to give Cape Breton absolute autonomy over immigration. And I said, yes, that's it, you got it. And she said, I'm sorry, that is never, never, never going to happen. Interestingly, in the spring of this year, through a whole set of unexpected circumstances, we get an audience with the Minister of Immigration, Federal Minister of Immigration. And we have an immigration program at New Dawn, and it's run by an immigrant from Egypt. She's a brilliant young woman. So we have this audience with the minister, and essentially it's the director of our immigration program who's leading that conversation, and the minister is an immigrant. So he begins the meeting by naturally telling us about the wonderful things they're doing, and she responds that yes, they're very good, but there's a problem, and she begins to try to explain to him Cape Breton's problem. He really pushes back, and they're back and forth. And then he, after 40 minutes or so, he says, yeah, really, I never thought of that before. That makes a lot of sense, what you want to do. Give me a proposal. So she stood up and she handed him the proposal. Which was quite grand. Gordon's timing in terms of my invitation here is quite impeccable for two reasons. And I'm not promoting a particular political party. We've got an election going on, as all of you know, but for those from the south of the border, we do have an election going on in Canada. And clearly the party that's been in power is the Liberals. That's the party we've been dealing with. And we probably had nothing to do with this. Yesterday, the Liberals released their complete platform. And there's this small little part of that platform that announces that if re-elected, they are going to institute a municipal nomination program. So this is a very modest beginning. They're talking about a limit of 5,000 people. And clearly there's not a lot of details in terms of how it's all going to work. Do you know, if you ever, as people have told me this, like if you're going to write a book sometimes, they say you better hurry up and write it, because within 6 months somebody else is going to write that book. Like sometimes an idea just comes, and this idea seems to have come. And I think, I mean, I don't know, what do I know about BC? I don't know anything. But I think, I mean, it just seems to me there are 7 billion people in the world. It's like an ocean of people. And many, many, many hundreds of thousands of those people are looking for an opportunity, a better opportunity. So for a place like Cape Breton, this is like going to the ocean once a year and getting a thimbleful of the ocean. Now, it doesn't have any impact in terms of 7 billion people, but it transforms the island. It transforms the island. We're in the game. We've got a chance. And to think, this is not the answer, but to think that it's finally in play federally in terms of beginning to move this beyond provincial jurisdiction and move it into municipal and community jurisdiction. This is incredibly, for me, prophetic and exciting. The second piece of Gordon's brilliant timing is, I mean, really, Cape Breton Island is of no national significance. The only time that I ever remember we made the front cover of the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper, was when the federal government announced they were going to close the coal fields in 1999. And there was a big demonstration and violence and all that kind of stuff. We made the front page then. And you know what? We made the front page of the Globe and Mail today. Cape Breton, we have a university, Cape Breton University. And as the population has been declining, so too has the university. And, you know, many of us have said, as goes the community, so too will go the university. So 2 years ago, the university was really struggling. There was a big question, like, how in the world is this institution going to survive? About 10 years ago, there was a very small effort begun in terms of attracting international students. In the last 2 years, that has really taken hold. 2 years ago, the enrollment was 3,500. The enrollment this year is 5,500. 2/3 of that enrollment is international students. What this means is we really don't give a damn what the province is going to do. We've suddenly got this path in terms of immigrants coming in. Most of the immigrants right now are Indian. They're from India. Most of them come, they've already got a degree. Many, there's a number of streams they're particularly interested in: business, engineering, and public health. Many of those enrolled in the public health program already are certified. We have dentists in that program. We have nurses in that program. We have physicians in that program. I should tell them about Northern BC. So this is look, I'm not saying we're there, but these are just fascinating happenings and blessings in at least one of those critical transformational elements. I had, I was on the way here, Marie and I were in Seattle, and we were at a memorial service for a friend of ours, and this friend, I had the pleasure of writing a book with him, a book that's still not quite finished, Dr. Stuart Perry. His death was not, he'd been sick for some time, but I was delighted that we were able to be there to say goodbye to him. The book is about Cape Breton, and the book is about New Dawn. And what I would like to do is, in closing here, is read to you what I think is going to be the last couple of paragraphs of that book. And at this point, it's entitled A Final Reflection. The lives of all people in all times are driven by a narrative or an overarching story. Narratives have a power that arises from their meaning. People tend to be unconscious of the authority of narratives, but narratives either empower or oppress people's collective imagination. We live our lives inside the framework of a story, which advises who we are not, and what we can or cannot become. The epic stories that serve as the foundation for spiritual traditions provide for striking examples of the magnificence of narratives and their dominion. The Old Testament is a mighty story about a people destined to live in God's favor. The New Testament, too, is a profound narrative about the possibility of redemption. The ancient Gita is an eloquent description of the epic battle between divine possibility and earthly constraint. A more recent narrative is embodied in the American Declaration of Independence, which calls for a radical experiment in governance, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Neil Postman, the American educator, stated, this is a quote, "We are unceasingly creating histories and futures for ourselves through the medium of narrative. Without narrative, life has no meaning," end quote. The history, and thus the story, created in Cape Breton, in large measure, has been a history of oppression, dependence, uncertainty, powerlessness, and poverty. While New Dawn was born into this history, it was not born of this history. Figuratively, New Dawn's aspiration has been to engage the community in the task of creating a new narrative, leading to the possibility of a magnificent tomorrow. This new narrative must be created by all the people. It must be constructed by both the Mi'kmaq and the settlers. It must be written by both men and women. It must be assembled by both young and old. This new narrative will be a story about confidence. It will be a story about hope. It will be a story about prosperity for all our people. It will be a story that welcomes new people to our shores. And it will be a story that calls our children home. In other words, this new narrative will be a story about the new dawn. Thank you very much.